Hello and welcome to HERstory, a program that allows us to tell the stories of women who serve the nation, past and present. I'm Phyllis Wilson, president of the Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation and a retired Army Chief Warrant Officer 5. Today we are joined by Dr. Betty Moseley Brown. She is the designated federal official for the Veterans Family, Caregiver, and Survivor Federal Advisory Committee. And before that, she served as the Associate Director for the Center for Women Veterans at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And she has a new book, Leadership Lessons, Personal Reflections from a Woman Marine, which will soon be available in bookstores. Betty's passion for veterans began with her United States Marine Corps service.
Hoorah!
From 1978 to 1992, and that's where we'll start today's discussion. Betty, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chief Warrant Officer 5, Phyllis Wilson.
Betty, I love you. Let's start at the beginning of your story. What drew you to service and why the United States Marine Corps specifically?
Well, I have to tell you that in 1978, I was 18 years old and I knew everything about everything. So my Army mom, my Air Force dad, my grandfather was Navy. I thought everyone was an Army soldier. I really didn't know the difference. So I went down to the recruiting station and the rest is history. There was a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant there. And before I knew it, I was at Paris Island, South Carolina, the land that God forgot.
So there you were. So looking back at your time in the Marine Corps, can you share what some of your achievements were and what are you most proud of during your time in uniform?
Well, I could say that it was making the rank of staff sergeant, being a staff non-commissioned officer, or I could say being first in my administrative class, or I could say first in my recruiting class, and that I had a successful tour on recruiting. But as a Marine, it was surviving boot camp. I survived boot camp. I survived the rifle range, and I had a successful tour on recruiting. So I'm down to the bare bottoms. Once you've earned the title Marine, it's those little things like what rifle badge do you wear on your lapel or on your chest. So I'm honored to have earned the title, and I'm honored still to have earned those things that Marines hold dear to all of us.
It's so true. As an Army person, we were always proud, obviously, when we graduated basic training and so forth, but there was no rite of passage. That globe and anchor that is you've earned. It's not given to. You worked hard to get that. I think that's really a difference. The rest of us are all called, we're an Army soldier, we're a Navy sailor. A Marine is a Marine, and it's the only branch of service that is that way. So here at the Military Women's Memorial, we recently unveiled an incredible new exhibit that's called The Color of Freedom, honoring the diversity of America's service women. Now, this exhibit highlights the stories of service women of color. So can you talk about that intersection of being, one, a woman, and two, African American in the Marine Corps?
Absolutely. And when you look at me and you look at any female of color, even before we open our mouths, you see that we are of color and you see our gender. So even before we can excel and do the great things that we know we can do, we are already judged on what we look like and the gender we are. So it was very important, I think, for all of us, all the women that I knew, all the women, that we must excel just because we are women. And then those of us of color, we had the extra incentive to do very well because we knew that is how we would be judged. Even we may not even be judged on what we do or how we do it, but who we are.
Yeah, that's a challenge. Did you find that there was significant pushback? It's in the late 70s. You and I are very close in age. I graduated high school also in 78. So I joined the Army, and I know, I had nicknames like Barbie and things like that, and was very much marginalized, but in a different manner. So, with the new book that you've got coming out this month called Leadership Lessons, Personal Reflections from a Woman Marine. And there's going to be a Zoom launch party on March 28th that we're going to encourage everyone to attend. I can't wait for your book, but I'm so glad I got that sneak peek into chapter 2.
When we were talking about the cover of the book, I really did, I thought, well, I know people know my face, so I got to have that on it, but I couldn't think of anywhere else that I would want to be or to be standing in front of for the cover of the book. So thank you and the memorial for allowing me to have the memorial's image on my book. And I have to say, just from the bottom of my heart, my plan is to donate a portion of the book proceeds just to you all, because for the little things that you need. I know there are big things, the lights will stay on, but I want to make sure that you all have a little bit extra, because you are so much of my story.
Oh, that's fantastic. I appreciate that. So can you share what leadership lessons you learned from your service in the military?
Well, I actually learned quite a bit, and I've learned quite a bit. I continuously try to learn. So when I started out to write a book, I thought it was just going to be a reflection from my many decades. And I realized I have so much that was just that foundation. Growing up with an Army mother, she gave me things that I wouldn't have gotten anywhere else. And so it's those lessons from her that I wanted to share, and then to show how the Marine Corps gave me the same thing. They just validated what my wonderful mother had already taught me. So you know how we all love acronyms, Phyllis. We all love acronyms. So I decided that each chapter in the book would spell out MARINES. So you never forget what chapter you're on, because you're spelling Marines, right? So the M is for motivation. This was one of the first things that I learned in drill when we were doing cadence, the motivation. And so I didn't realize that just that syncness of having the drill instructors and your other platoon members, you really did get motivated by that. And then A, attitude. If you have an attitude that you're not going to win, that you're not going to be the best, that you can't get it through. Attitude of Marines, it's legendary. When we go into battle, we have to go in as a winner. That's just what we do. And then R for resilience. If for some reason you don't make it, you're down and out, you need to have that springboard to make yourself out, to make yourself back up. Resilience. You need to be intentional. And this was something that it took me a while to learn, that doors just don't open for you. You have to plan your career. You have to plan your next steps. You have to find a quiet place. And the only way to be intentional is to be quiet, be still, and to map that strategy out. And then N for nourishment. We nourish our bodies and we nourish our minds. And I hate to say it, but with the internet, there's a whole lot of junk that can go in that mind. And so we have to be intentional as to how we nourish ourselves. And then E for Energizer. I always have energy. I always try to find a way in the morning to be calm so that I have the energy to make it through the day. And then the S is for self-awareness, which is we really have to go deep within ourselves to see what needs to change, maybe what doesn't need to change. But if you keep getting what you've been getting, and you want to change, that's not going to work. So that is a little snippet of the MARINES in Leadership Lessons, Perspectives from a Woman Marine.
Yeah, I just had enough out of the A chapter, and I'm like, I can't wait to get my hands on the whole book, and I'm going to make sure you autograph that one for me as well.
You ask about my Marine Corps background. Let me tell you, I believe, which I wish somebody had told me, that always ask why. Whenever things happen, ask why. Be more educated, be more informed. I'll give you an example if I can, just a funny story. So in the Marine Corps, in the 1980s, we were actually starting to learn how to shoot the M16. And we would go out, we would do what's called familiar fire, and we would learn, and then we would qualify. I continuously went unqualified. We call it UNC. I was an UNCer. I just couldn't figure out how to shoot. I was holding the weapon, I was looking down range, I saw the target, but I was having trouble qualifying. It wasn't until probably years later when I was a corporal or a sergeant when someone made the comment about left-handed shooters. And here I realized I was left-handed, but no one had ever asked me if I was left-handed so I could learn how to shoot left-handed. So that is truly a lesson in life. If something isn't getting the outcome that you think you should, do your homework and ask why.
I love that. And to that point, I'm left-handed. And when I had to qualify with a weapon, same thing, but I identified myself as a lefty. So they gave me that, and they give you this little brass guard because as the brass comes out of the weapon, if you're left-handed, it hits you dead in the. Yes, I had spots on my, because I didn't know to ask for a brass deflector. Who knows those things? You're a young, soldier. So sure enough, and one went right down the front of my T-shirt, and you know how they just kick out the way they do? You just don't know those things until, but lesson learned. And then I always looked out for my soldiers. One, as a lefty, you tend to notice another person, even if they're taking notes or something, oh, another lefty, because there's not that many of us. But then I would always know if I was a squad leader or a platoon, leader, then I would look and say, okay, do you know what you need to do? Because I thought I was fairly well informed, but clearly I was completely ignorant on how to fire a weapon and safely. So I love that story. And so you were firing right-handed?
I was firing right-handed, and it took all I had. Once you go UNC, then you have to wait, and then you have to go back out. You never get to go back to your job until you actually have to stay there till you qualify. And they thought food service was my military occupational service because I was in the chow hall so much with the rifle groups.
Oh my goodness. That goes to the case that in the Marine Corps, doesn't matter what your MOS, your career field is, every Marine is what first?
An infantryman.
That's exactly. And so that must be accomplished. And when did women have the right then to start training with a weapon in the Marine Corps?
Well, it was in the 80s and 90s. And, then they got smarter and realized that it's not just the familiarity with the rifle. You really need the same training, a week on training, like the males. So now the training, they train the males and the females. They give them the same rifle training. And it's wonderful. And actually, I love it because many of our women have outshot many of our male Marines. Yay!
I've seen that. Some of the sharpshooter, the U.S. Olympic teams and so forth are women coming out, from the military that are their sharpshooters. So that's fantastic. After you left the Marine Corps, you went on to dedicate your life to veterans issues. I mean, you worked as a benefits counselor, you've done outreach, you certainly have worked on women veterans issues. So what is the nearest and dearest aspect of that?
The nearest and dearest is absolutely where you are sitting. It's women in military service for America. When I see a young girl in uniform, I think back to all the times the congressional women would come and lay the wreath at the Women's Memorial, and I would take the Metro over, and just to see the honor, the patriotism of the representatives from each of the military services, representing all the women of their service. It's something, that's what makes us a sisterhood, because we know the trials and the tribulations. We all may not be on the same journey, but we understand each other's journey. And that just makes it's so special.
Wow. And I know obviously the Marine Corps, once a Marine, always a Marine. So you've never changed and taken that away from your heart. And including that you've served as the 19th National President of the Women Marines Association, right? You raised funds for a burial marker for Opha May Johnson, who was the first woman ever known to have enlisted in the Marine Corps. So can you please, from your perspective, tell us her story and why preserving stories like hers are so important?
Well, you know, the law actually had to change, and they looked at the sea services. And so it was actually the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard during World War I that were allowed to allow women into the reserve component. So at that time, they were really doing newspaper articles and trying to get the word out for young girls and women to enlist in the military, especially in the Marine Corps. And they got thousands and thousands of applications. So, you know, in true Marine Corps fashion, we just didn't want to take anyone. You know, we needed to make sure that she was in the best physical shape, that she was the best administrator, that she could be clerical, because remember, the motto was to free a man to fight. So it was in those jobs that women could do, supposedly. Of course, now women can, we always have been able to do all jobs, but now the legislation has caught up with it. But back then, it was for a specific type of clerical, administrative type of role. So even though thousands applied, guess how many the Marine Corps took in that first group?
I have no idea.
300. Yep, 305 were the first to enroll in the Marine Corps. And Opha May was right there. Now, what you don't normally hear about Opha May, she was 40 years old. That was unbelievable. Whenever I first heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, if she tried to enlist today, she would need a waiver.
Exactly.
But it was so important of the maturity level that they were looking for a Marine to serve. So Opha May served for a year. She actually made from 1918 to 1919, and she actually made the rank of sergeant. And when the war was over, she went back home and lived with Victor, who was her husband, Victor Johnson. And whenever she passed, I thought it was interesting. I actually wrote this down because at the age of 76, Opha passed away at the Mount Alto Veterans Hospital. And she was buried next to her husband, who was Victor Hugo Johnson, in Rock Creek Cemetery, which is in Maryland. But it was a family cemetery plot. And we found out about 2017, right before we were going to celebrate 100 years of women in the Marine Corps, that Opha was in an unmarked grave with nothing that even marked her name or her legendary service. And so the Women Marines Association and the Marine Corps decided that we needed to make sure that her legacy would never be forgotten. And anyone at Rock Creek Cemetery or anyone that looked her up on the internet, they would be able to see where the first woman Marine was buried. So it was truly an honor to stand next to the Commandant and to stand next to other Marines and to get her beautiful obelisk. It's a beautiful memorial in Rock Creek Cemetery that actually has her name right there, and giving a little bit about her military, her Marine Corps story. And she was the first. I mean, this is a name that from day one in the Marine Corps, we say the name of who the first woman Marine was. And so it's close to my heart. And I tell some people, for the longest time, I just knew that Opha was a Black woman because of her name, Opha. but Opha was not. And Opha was, she was way beyond her years. And I'm just so thankful that she was the first. And we had a chance to honor her in 2018.
At the 100th anniversary of the Marines. Yeah, we had an exhibit, as you know, at the Women's Memorial there at Arlington National Cemetery, honoring the 100 years of women Marines. And I love the photos from Opha May Johnson and what World War I uniforms looked like for those women, as opposed to what they're wearing now in Afghanistan and so forth, and the kit, and what a difference the attire and, you know, of course, the photos are much glossier and shinier now than the graininess of back then. But that 100 years has really changed things. And let's talk just you and I. So sad to say, but a little more than 40 years ago, we raised our right hand and swore our allegiance. So what would you say now to other women on why they should join in current times? Why should they join the armed forces?
I think it's an important discussion with our young people, period. It doesn't even necessarily have to be with a young female or a young girl, because every child needs to know their worth. They need to know that no one should ever take advantage of them. And whenever there's any type of personal trauma or personal harassment, it's because of power. Someone wants to take your power. So that's what we need to be telling our young girls and young boys, that they are owner of their power and never to give that to anyone else. If we educate in that manner, then once they get to that wonderful place known as Paris or somewhere else, that they're ready. They're ready. You know, it's the same discussion that needs to be had before we send our young people to colleges. And it's important dialogue. I wish that we didn't have to say that, but we do need to let our young people know what their worth is, and their worth is not for sale.
That's so true. And I love that you also pointed that out with regards to going away to college or, moving away from home, that to understand you don't have necessarily that safety net that you can just turn to. And so you've got to learn how to look inward and understand, to that point, your worth. Betty, for years, you've been such a great friend and a staunch ally to the Military Women's Memorial. You're part of one of our 360-degree videos called Changing the Face of Courage. And one lady that was there, Air Force retired, standing on her cane, and she looked around and she said, it's because we deserve to be here. We've earned the right to be here. And I thought, so why is having a memorial dedicated to military women so important?
It's so important because it's not only important for those of the past, that we remember the past, because it's their shoulders that we stand on, or the women of today, the current women who are in uniform. They're just trying to get through the day and get their mission done. They may not even realize there is a memorial, but it's for the women of the future and the young boys and men of the future, of everyone of the future, because it's our history. It's not just her story, or what they say about history, it's his story. Her story is her story, but it's all of our stories. And so that's why I remember in 2010, whenever the national theme for Women's History Month was writing women back into history. And I remember thinking, well, where did we go? I didn't know anyone wrote us out of history. And then it dawned on me just what this campaign that the Women's Memorial is doing. If we keep saying his story, it is his story. And so I'm so glad that you're doing the HERstory, because women such as myself, women such as my mom, my mother, I wish that I had sat with her just a little longer, just to hear the stories of her in the 1950s when she joined the Army, when she left a small town in Pennsylvania, went to Germany, in Landstuhl, Germany. I would have loved to have just asked her some more questions about what her service was like. But there's a memorial where we can enter those stories. So if anyone wants to know who they served with, or maybe their battle buddy, or just they think of another name, that's where we can go. Because Google, even though Google's good, Google doesn't have all the names. Whereas our Women's Memorial, it's our home. So that's why it's so important, because that is our home. That's where we can go.
Yeah, before I took over as president, Major General D. McWilliams was our president here. And one of the things that she talked about was not everybody will have a book written about them or by them. Now, in this case, obviously, Betty Moseley Brown did. But like for me and others, probably never have a book written about us. But we still, every one of us, whether you served a couple of years or a couple of decades, it does not matter. So, you've claimed your rightful place in history in our database, what we call the register. And thank you for doing that, and for your mom's sake as well. Why, again, what can you say, again, you've done a pretty good job already, reiterate again, what can you say to encourage our other sisters in arms to also claim their place here?
Because our stories are noteworthy. We need to make sure that our stories are documented so that they're not forgotten. Oftentimes in our history books, the first is mentioned, but it's not by gender. So it will be the first who did it. And sometimes it's not us, because they need to understand how the law changed, that women couldn't automatically be the first in many things. Now the laws are catching up, and we are. They give us a bar and we exceed the bar. And so that's why it's so important that our stories, all of our stories, are documented in the Women's Memorial.
Thanks. And so we have 3 million women, 3 million that have served this nation, right? And we have 300,000 that have registered their story, which is a great number. But that means 2.7 million have not yet come home to their Women's Memorial to share their story. So whether you or a family member that you know that may have already passed on has ever served, is a woman that has ever served in the military, we are your place to tell that story forevermore, long into perpetuity, centuries from now. They can look up Betty Moseley Brown, myself, anybody, your mother. We can find those stories and the information that they've shared, including their most memorable experiences. So Dr. Betty Moseley Brown, thank you so much for joining us today. And I encourage everyone, check out our website, womensmemorial.org, for information on Betty's upcoming book and information on the launch. And join us next month for another episode of HERstory. Thank you, Miss Betty Moseley Brown.